Hi, my name's Simon Horobin and I'm Fellow and Tutor in English here at Magdalen College, Oxford. And we're currently sitting in the new buildings, the same building that C.S. Lewis lived in when he also was a Fellow and Tutor in English. Clive Staples Lewis, or Jack as he was known to all his friends, he was an academic, a teacher and a scholar of the medieval and Renaissance periods, but also was a philosopher, a theologian, a Christian apologist, and a writer of children's fantasy. And the reason I got interested in Lewis is that when I came to the college and began teaching the same subjects that he himself taught and was interested in, I wanted to learn more about who he was and think about what it would have been like to have been taught by Lewis. Lewis first came to Magdalen as a fellow in the summer of 1925, and I think he would recognise much of the college still today. I guess one of the most significant changes might be that we now have female students. Lewis did teach women, but only in the women's colleges. The food is excellent at Magdalen, yes indeed, and I think that's partly why C.S. Lewis put on so much weight while he was here, but of course it was also the port and the Turkish delight, another interesting Magdalen connection. Does that explain why he chose Turkish delight as the sweetmeat that proves Edmund's undoing in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe? Walter Hooper's first connection with Lewis was through letters. And when he was in the US Army in 1954, Walter wrote to Lewis to say how affected he'd been by his book, The Miracles, which he'd read. And Lewis wrote back and said, "There's a lovely letter. I'm glad if I have been an instrument of our Lord's blessing to you." And that is again the beginning of a friendship that continues through correspondence for a time until 1963, when Walter visited Oxford for the first time and came to meet Lewis in person. At that point, he wanted to write a biography of Lewis. Lewis tried to talk him out of it, said, "Never write biographies of living authors. They can answer you back." But nevertheless, Walter was keen to persevere. I was lucky enough during Walter's lifetime to have access to the Walter Hooper collection, many of the materials that are now in the Bodleian, and he very kindly supported an exhibition that I put on here at Magdalen, which we were able to show many of these materials: Lewis's pipe, his dip pen, and some of his annotated volumes. Lewis was an incredible annotator of texts, and he has a habit of, one which I wouldn't encourage my students to do, of writing in pen in all the books that he read. And then often his second and third thoughts as well, because he'll often go back and reread these texts, but this time he annotates them in a different ink, and then he dates that reading in that same ink so that you can sort of see the layers of Lewis's response to these texts. Lewis first met J.R.R. Tolkien at a meeting of the English faculty in 1926. We're very fortunate because Lewis gives a description of that first meeting in his diary, and it sounds as if they didn't get on particularly well. They disagreed over a number of things, and Lewis concludes his account with "no harm in him, only needs a smack or so," which doesn't sound like the beginning of a great long-lasting friendship. But by the end of the 1920s, they are firm friends. They've got together regularly to translate the old Icelandic sagas into English. He was part of the Coalbiters group that Tolkien set up. And they spent a lot of time together, mostly in the pubs of Oxford. They would often meet at the Eastgate Hotel, halfway between Merton College and Magdalen College, or famously in the Eagle and Child, where the group that grew up around them, known as the Inklings, used to meet, reading extracts from The Lord of the Rings or from the Screwtape Letters. The landmark in Oxford that's most associated with Lewis's writings is the doorway that stands on St Mary's Passage. The story goes that one snowy evening, Lewis found himself right opposite this doorway with two gilded fawns on either side and what appears to be the carved head of a lion, the centre of the door. And then when you turn to the right, there's an old-fashioned Victorian lamppost. The story goes it's that moment that Lewis has the idea for the opening of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Now the problem with that story, which is hugely charming and very attractive, is that Lewis himself said that the beginning of that story was a picture of a snowy wood and a fawn holding some brown paper packages. And he says that picture, he first saw it in his imagination in his early teens. And it wasn't until he was in his 40s that he thought he would try and make up a story about it. I think it's true to say that Lewis is better known today in the US than he is in the UK. That wouldn't have greatly surprised him, because in 1947 he appeared on the front of Time magazine, and that's even before the publication of the book that he's best known for today, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. We are very fortunate that we receive so many and so generous gifts from our US supporters, and that's one of the things that allows us to keep Oxford University be as one of the top universities in the world today. Lewis himself was a famous philanthropist and gave most of the money that he earned, especially from the royalties to his books, away to his friends, his students, or to people he didn't know at all who wrote to him in need. And he called the trust that he set up the Agapone Trust, from the Greek word agape, meaning love, or how it's translated in the authorized version of the Bible, charity. Gifts in wills have been incredibly important, both to Magdalen College and to the universities, and it's that helps to maintain things like the distinctive tutorial system, the pursuit of academic excellence, that means the best students can come here irrespective of their financial background, and the upkeep of these ancient and historic buildings.